I used to believe. As long as I kept loving and giving, family would always be a place to come home to. I was wrong. At 71, a small fall in the kitchen marked the beginning of the greatest collapse of my life. The fall from being a mother. I remember that day clearly. The first wind of the season rattled the windows as I fussed over a pot of soup for Miles, my son, and his wife Darla. They were coming over for dinner, like every Sunday. I still did everything myself. Cleaning, cooking, wiping down the stairs, even though my knees had worn thin and my memory wasn't what it used to be. I slipped and fell. No broken bones, just a sprained ankle. But right then, Darla walked into the kitchen. She didn't rush to help me. She just stood there, eyes scanning the room like she was assessing the damage. "Maybe you should consider moving somewhere with care," she said, putting odd emphasis on the word moving, as if I were a piece of furniture ready to be replaced. I gave a small laugh. "It's just a little fall, no big deal." She didn't laugh. That day, Miles never showed up. He texted to say he was stuck in traffic. But I knew Miles had never once been stuck in traffic on a Sunday. 2 weeks later, they took me to a cafe I'd never been to before. I thought maybe they wanted a change of scenery, but then Darla placed a thick stack of papers in front of me. "House transfer documents," she said, her voice sweeter than artificial sugar. "Your name is on the deed, right? If you're going to be living in a care facility, the house will just sit there. Such a waste." I looked at Miles. He wouldn't look at me. They said it was just a formality to make things easier in case something happened. They said they loved me. They didn't say it outright, but I understood. Either sign or become a problem. I raised Miles with these hands, worked myself raw at the bakery every morning to pay his tuition. I even sold my wedding ring to help him buy his first home. And still, that day, I signed. Not because I trusted them, but because I was afraid of losing what little I had left. My son, Sunday dinners, a few scraps of affection. A month later, I overheard them. I had forgotten my handkerchief in the living room and went back to get it. The door was ajar. I heard Darla clearly. "We could sell the house sooner. She doesn't need to know. There's still that little cottage near the coast from old Mrs. Noel. She can move there." "You think she'll agree?" Miles asked, voice low. "She's old, and she owes me, Miles. I gave up my job to take care of your kid, remember?" I stood frozen, the world blurring behind a sheet of glass. I didn't cry. I just felt cold. Not from the wind, but from the truth. I was no longer a mother in their eyes. Just a name on a document. A burden. I shrank behind the door, quietly walked away. That night I packed, without a word. I left behind my keys, my savings book, and the mailbox filled with memories I once thought I'd pass down to my grandchildren. I walked out of the house I once believed was home. From that moment on, I was no longer anyone's mother. I left my own house at 3 a.m. No one knew. One hand gripped a small suitcase, the other clutched a cloth bag filled with a few notebooks and a framed photo of me and Angela when she was a little girl. The only thing I brought with me, a reminder that there had once been love here. No goodbyes, no tears, just the sound of my footsteps on the freezing concrete, as if I were walking across my own old age, hollow, silent, and mercilessly pushed away. I caught the earliest bus to the coast, about 2.5 hours from the city. The seaside cottage had been left to me by Noel, a distant cousin, 7 years ago. I never imagined I'd live there. It was small, old, without central heating, tucked deep down a dirt road near a pine forest. But that morning, it was the only place no one could take from me. The house hadn't changed. The wooden door was chipped, the air damp and musty, cobwebs stretching across the corners of the ceiling. I lit a candle, took off my coat, rested my hand on the rough wooden table, and whispered to myself, "Welcome home, Martha." That first day I did nothing. I just lay still, listening to the wind whistle through the window panes, hearing the ocean murmur from afar like an old friend telling a story. I made a simple bowl of soup, drank unsweetened black tea, and reread my old notes. The whole day passed without me speaking a word to anyone. For the first time in years, I was alone, and not being judged. By the third day, I began to clean. I scrubbed every corner of the walls, removed each rusted hook, mended the curtains with hands more used to holding a sewing needle than signing over deeds. I bought paint, coated the walls myself, a soft, milky white, gentle as a mother's palm. I bought small cactus pots, planted bougainvillea vines. The cottage started to smell like me: mint, lemon, and a touch of quiet resilience. In the second week, I went to the village market. A fish seller asked, "New in town?" I smiled. "Not exactly. I used to belong somewhere. Now I just belong to myself." A woman named Patricia recognized me from a women's group meeting years ago. She invited me to her home for tea. She told me her husband had passed long ago, her children lived overseas, and she'd been living alone for years. We talked about herbs, how to keep a house warm in winter, and eventually, about things no one dares to say out loud. "I was kicked out by my daughter once," she said. "She told me I was ruining her marriage because I didn't cook the way her husband liked." I held her hand. There was no need for more words, just two aging hands understanding each other. I began to write, not polished poetry, but raw, bitter pieces, honest like sea salt, about the life of a forgotten mother. I sent my first post to a social media group for older women. I used a pen name, MH. They started writing back. One said her daughter-in-law locked the fridge against her. Another said her son blocked her number. One had been tricked into signing medical forms that landed her in a nursing home. I read every letter, printed them, and pinned them to the cottage wall. I called it my wall of truth. Each sheet a piece of a life. And I, Martha Harlow, suddenly didn't feel alone anymore. One day, I received a handwritten letter. The sender, Angela, my daughter. "Mom, I don't know what happened. I called Miles, and he said you went away to rest. But he didn't sound convincing. I'm sorry I haven't visited more. If you need me, I'll come." I read it over and over. My emotions rose and fell like the tide. Angela had always been the gentle one, easily overshadowed. I used to hope she'd take my side, but she chose silence. And now, with me gone, worry finally crept in. I haven't replied. I need more time. One morning I stood staring at the gray sea, waves curling in silence. I wondered, if I died tomorrow, who would come to my funeral? Who would speak of me, not as a mother, not a grandmother, not a woman cast aside, but as someone who dared to step out of the shadows? I don't need the world to honor me. I just need to know I am still free. I still have dignity. And even if I lose everything else, I will not let anyone take that from me. I stepped into the law office on a damp afternoon. A fine mist had settled on the shoulders of my worn wool coat, and though I clutched my handbag tightly, my hands trembled slightly with a familiar feeling: unease. But this time, I wasn't here to plead. I was here to reclaim what should never have been taken from me. Sitting across from me was Mr. Caleb Johnson, an elderly lawyer with clear eyes and a calm voice. He was the one Noel had once mentioned, the man who helped her write her will and arrange her affairs when she realized old age waits for no one. I handed him a stack of documents I had quietly gathered. A copy of the deed transfer I'd foolishly signed, vague and unsettling messages from Angela, and a detailed record of the money I had transferred to Miles's account over the years. Every note, every date meticulously documented. Caleb read in silence, then looked up at me. His gaze held not just sympathy, but something else: respect. "Mrs. Martha, you have enough grounds to file a civil suit, and if you wish, you could not only recover the property but also pursue financial restitution." I nodded. "I'm not seeking revenge, I just want the truth acknowledged. And, if possible, whatever dignity I have left." That night I called Angela. For the first time in weeks, I was the one to reach out. She answered with a confused tone. "Mom, is everything okay?" I kept my voice steady. "We need to talk. About the house. About what you and Miles did behind my back." Silence, then an awkward laugh. "What are you talking about? We just thought—" "I know everything, and I've spoken to a lawyer." Complete silence. I could hear shuffling on the other end, like someone had dropped the phone. "Is Miles there?" I asked. "Good, then both of you listen. I don't want to take this to court, but if that's the only way to restore the truth, I'm ready." 3 days later, I received a cold email from Angela. They proposed a mediation meeting at a downtown cafe. I wore the ash-gray dress Noelle used to love. She once said it made me look like a strict schoolteacher with a heart. Maybe that was exactly the image I needed today. Angela arrived first, dressed in designer clothes, carefully made up but visibly tense. Miles trailed behind, glancing around nervously as if worried someone might recognize him. I didn't offer a handshake. I pulled out the chair, sat down, and placed my handbag on the table. Inside were copies of the files Caleb had prepared, and a printout of the bank transactions. Every dollar I had spent on them over nearly 10 years, from down payments, renovations, to their children's tuition fees. Angela spoke first. "Mom, it was a misunderstanding. I just thought you wanted to rest, to not worry about all the legal stuff." "You think I'm stupid?" I interrupted, calmly but firmly. "Don't paint me as some senile old woman just to justify deceit." Miles cleared his throat. "We didn't mean any harm. But if you sue, you'll tear this family apart. Emma will be heartbroken. We'll suffer." I looked him straight in the eye. My son, the child I once held in my arms when he was just a newborn. If I stay silent, what's left of this family that's even worth saving, Miles? After the meeting, I didn't cry. I walked straight to the beach, where the wind lashed at my face, stinging my skin, reminding me I was still alive, still capable of feeling pain. Caleb sent me the first draft of the lawsuit paperwork. I read every line carefully, and somehow I felt a little lighter. I didn't know if I would win it all, but one thing was certain. They would never again assume I could be erased like a name from a deed. A week later, I received a letter from Miles's office. They wanted to settle. They offered to return part of the money and let me keep Noel's seaside cottage as compensation. I laughed out loud. That house had always been mine, written in the will, written in Noel's heart, and now in every peaceful breath I took each morning. I sent my reply. I don't want the money. I want my name cleared. A formal letter of apology, and for them to relinquish all claims to any property we had once shared. When the letter of apology arrived, I didn't open it right away. I placed it on the table, brewed a cup of tea, and only then slowly opened the envelope. Angela had written it by hand, the letters tilted slightly. Maybe it was sincere. Maybe it was just her lawyer's doing. But that no longer mattered. What mattered was this. I was no longer pushed into the shadows of my own story. That night I stood on Noel's porch, looking up at the stars, twinkling as if to remind me that I still had a chapter left to live. Not to forgive or forget, but to live as I chose. I was no longer Mom in their version of the story. I was Martha. The woman who held her head high and walked away from what she once thought was family, to go and find herself again. I never imagined there would come a day when I'd become the one listening to someone else's pain, while my own wounds were still bleeding beneath the surface. But then, one rainy afternoon, I found myself sitting at a seaside cafe, the kind with a small table facing the ocean and golden lights that hummed like a lullaby. A woman approached, hesitant, and asked, "Are you Mrs. Martha? Noel's close friend?" I nodded. She sat down, hands clenched tightly together, as if trying to hold on to something slipping through her fingers. "I was one of Noel's former students," she said softly. "I heard you used to live with your son, but now you're here alone." I smiled, bittersweet. More like pushed out, but yes, now I'm here, alone. And just like that, she began to talk. About a husband who for 10 years never stopped resenting her. About a mother-in-law who always called her a freeloader. About the night she left with her daughter, a single bag of clothes and $200 hidden in the freezer. I listened. I didn't interrupt, didn't offer advice. But when she cried, I handed her tissues. When she laughed, bitter and hollow, I let out the same kind of laugh. In that moment between two strangers, a quiet breath passed from one woman to another. She later introduced me to 2 of her friends. Then it became 5. 7. 12. They started meeting with me every weekend. We called it a tea group, but in truth, it was an underground court. A place where women quietly stood witness to each other's wounds. No one judged. We told our stories, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel alone. One young woman shared how she dropped out of school because her stepmother insisted, then became a housemaid, and was threatened with eviction when she refused her employer's special requests. An older woman said she once skipped meals so her son could build a house, only to be pushed into a cramped room next to the storage shed. To keep things tidy, they told her. Different tales, but the same ache, as familiar as an old blanket we'd all been wrapped in at some point. I remembered the night I left that house in the suburbs. The one I'd put the down payment on, paid in installments, landscaped with my own hands, painted window frames through every season. Angela had said, "Just sign it, Mom. It'll make it easier for us to get the business loan." So I signed. I trusted them. And then I became a stranger, quietly wheeling my suitcase out the front door like an uninvited guest. I shared that story one evening. My voice didn't shake, but my eyes betrayed me. The group fell silent. Then one woman clapped, then another, then a third. No one offered hollow comfort. They simply looked at me like I had done something brave. But really, I was just surviving. A week later, someone from the group, her name was Rachel, texted me, "Mrs. Martha, I need a lawyer. My ex-husband is trying to sell the house without dividing the assets." I gave her Carl's number, the attorney handling my own case. Rachel won. She didn't have to move. She didn't have to sleep on her best friend's couch, holding her child through the night. And then she helped someone else, who helped someone else. A circle was drawn, all starting from one single fracture. None of us demanded the world to change overnight. We didn't carry protest signs or write angry petitions. We simply did the smallest thing a woman who had once been overlooked could do. We stood up, we spoke the truth, and we held on to our dignity. One day, Emma came to visit. My granddaughter. She hugged me tight and whispered, "Grandma, I'm sorry. I didn't know they treated you that way." I squeezed her hand. "It's not your fault." We all come to a moment when we must choose between ourselves and someone else. I've chosen wrong before, too. Emma looked around my small home, the scent of wood, the sound of waves, Noel's paintings on the wall. She whispered, "I wish you had brought me here sooner." I smiled. "It's not too late. Here, you can start over any time." That night, I opened the cabinet and pulled out the wooden box Noel had left me. Inside were old photographs, a notebook, and a few handwritten pages. On one of them, she'd written, "If one day you find yourself lost, invite someone in for tea. No need to explain anything, just one cup of tea and two people patient enough to sit still." I did just that, invited others in for tea. And it turns out that quietness became the loudest voice of my life. I didn't go to court to reclaim the bricks that built the house I once called home. I went to assert that I am still alive, that I still have a voice, and it deserves to be heard. The courtroom was nearly empty that day. Just me, my attorney, Mrs. Lyle, and on the other side, Miles, Angela, and their lawyer. I didn't look my son in the eyes when I walked in. I was afraid that if I did, I'd fall apart before I could steady myself. Instead, I looked up at the carved scales of justice hanging behind the judge's bench, where justice bears no face, no tears, only truth. My lawyer presented the entire file, documents I had signed long ago, including the form removing my name from the deed of the house, the same form I had signed while Angela stood beside me, her hand on my shoulder, saying, "This is just a formality to make the mortgage process easier. Don't worry, everything still belongs to you." I believed her. Not because I was naive, but because I loved my son so much, I wanted to believe in what he believed in. I used to think that if I couldn't believe in him anymore, my life would feel meaningless. Angela's lawyer tried to argue that his client had supported me for years, that I'd lived in their home without contributing financially. I nearly laughed. Over the years, I had paid for everything from the kids' tuition to the repairs on their leaking roof. But I didn't need to justify myself. Mrs. Lyle did that, with evidence and a voice more unshakable than mine. By the end, the judge ruled the transfer of ownership was invalid due to signs of coercion and withheld information. The house would be frozen from any transactions pending civil investigation. And the most important thing, I was still a co-owner, at least until the law decided otherwise. I didn't clap. I just gently reached under the table and held Mrs. Lyle's hand, like clutching a tree branch in a fast-moving river. Not because I had won, but because I no longer feared losing everything. I had held on to a part of my dignity, a part of my name. That evening, I got a phone call from Miles. I didn't think you'd actually do this," he said coldly, without a trace of remorse. I said nothing. "Angela's really stressed. She didn't mean to. What you did just pushed us over the edge." I took a deep breath. Outside in the dark, the waves crashed distantly, a reminder that I had almost gone under with these people once before. "I used to think you were my lifeline, Miles," I said. "But in truth, I was always the lifeline for you. You've never once swum on your own." I hung up before my heart could soften again. Motherhood is the most stubborn tether, and sometimes it tightens around your neck before you even realize it. A week later, Angela sent me a letter. No apology, no regret. just blame. She wrote that I was tearing their family apart, that her children were sad they no longer saw the cheerful grandma they used to know, that I could be growing old peacefully instead of punishing your children. I folded the letter, but didn't tear it. I placed it in a wooden box, the one where I kept pieces of the past, their wedding photo, a letter Miles had written from boarding school, a crayon drawing from my granddaughter who once called me Princess Silver Hair. Now, that same box held Angela's accusations too, an archive of memory, so I would never forget what I had survived. The following week, I returned to Mrs. Lyle's office, not to file another lawsuit, but to amend my will. "Who do you want to leave everything to?" she asked, gently tapping the desk. I looked out the window. A soft drizzle had started. Part of it to an organization that protects elderly women from financial abuse. Part to the reading center Noelle used to support. And the rest to whoever truly needs it, but isn't expecting it. No share for Miles or your grandchildren? I shook my head. I'm not abandoning anyone. I'm simply putting things back where they belong. That afternoon I walked along the beach. The rain had stopped. The wind carried the scent of salt and seaweed. Crisp, cool, but oddly comforting. A young woman approached. She recognized me from last week's community gathering. She told me about her mother, who had also been forced out of her home by a remarried husband. She said, "Your story gave my mom the courage to move out and live on her own. Now she grows vegetables, bakes bread, and smiles like she did when I was little." I smiled. I didn't need a podium to leave something meaningful behind. A whisper would do, or simply the calm presence of a life lived with quiet purpose. That night, I sat on the porch with a cup of hot tea in my hands. In the distance, the lighthouse flickered, like a message whispered from the sea. I thought about tomorrow. No more tense meetings, no more legal strategies. Just me, my little porch, and a life rebuilt with my own 2 hands. I had won. Not because of the court case, but because I no longer begged to be acknowledged by my own family. I carried my last cup of morning tea out to the porch, slow and deliberate, as if there was nowhere left I needed to be in a hurry. Before me, the ocean stretched wide in endless blue. The waves rolled in like they were whispering something. Not regret, but a quiet farewell to days long gone. In my hands was a copy of the letter from the court, stamped in red like a final period on a long sentence of dependence. Full ownership and legal rights to the old house had been transferred back to me, thanks to timely intervention by the lawyer Noelle had once hired. Just in case, she had said, for the things no one dares to imagine. The document Angela tricked me into signing had been nullified. It violated the fundamental rights of a co-owner. That house, and all the quiet assets I had spent years quietly building, were now legally and unequivocally mine again. But strangely, I didn't feel the joy I once imagined. There was no cheering, no triumphant fist in the air, just a soft, hollow relief, like a rope that had been wrapped around my neck for too long had finally snapped. I didn't want to celebrate. I just wanted to breathe, deep, full, and on my own terms. Miles called a few times, the kind of calls heavy with silence or full of frantic apologies. Once he said, "I didn't know it would all turn out like this. I just wanted peace." I didn't answer. I used to crave that. Peace for 3 generations under one roof. But now I understood. Peace isn't something you get by looking away from injustice and calling it love. Peace only comes when you stop pretending that cruelty is part of kinship. Angela vanished. I heard she'd moved back in with her mother, taking the 2 children with her. I don't blame the kids. They're innocent. But I no longer had the strength, or the will, to engage in another battle for what was never freely offered. I wrote a letter to Miles, not to demand anything, not even to reconcile, just to end things with a kind goodbye. You were the first child to take my hand and make me believe motherhood was eternal, but perhaps as you grew, you learned how to forget the hand that held yours. I am no longer in a place where I need to beg for kindness from my own family. I forgive you, but I am not coming back. Live the rest of your life in a way that your own children will never feel compelled to write you a letter like this one. I folded the letter carefully, slid it into an ivory envelope, sealed it, and left it on the window ledge for tomorrow's post. That afternoon, I walked along the beach like I always did, my bare feet sinking gently into the warm sand. A woman around my age stood behind an old wooden fence, staring out at the sea. As I neared, she smiled. "Hello," she said. "I just moved into the house across the way. Looks like we're neighbors." We began chatting. At first, it was small talk about the breeze, the waves, and the way the sky glowed at dusk. But then slowly, I told her about Noel, about the gift she left me. Not the house, but something far more powerful, the permission to choose a different ending. The woman took my hand when I said, "I'm not the strongest grandmother, but I've learned that sometimes the kindest thing we can do for ourselves is to walk away." She nodded, as if she saw something of herself in me. And in that moment I understood. Not everyone gets a second chance. But if you do, don't hesitate to walk through the door others tried to close. That night, I sat in my wooden chair on the porch, a glass of wine in hand, and opened a small journal Noel had left behind on the side table. I flipped to a page, her handwriting tilted and careful. "Someday, when you're far enough from the past, tell this story, not for sympathy, but to remind other women. We are never a burden, as long as we remember we are worth something." I smiled softly. There was no applause. But deep inside, something nodded in quiet agreement. No more sorrow. No more longing. Freedom, I thought, is when you no longer need anyone's permission just to exist on your own terms.